The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear. And the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist. But we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio, where we explore the unexplained here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, coming to you within a cannon shot of historic Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I thank you for joining me. Now, before I introduce my guest this evening, I just wanted to mention that on August 31st, of this year, 2020, I did receive a call from a Madison, Wisconsin resident by the name of Deshunda Johnson, and this was in reference to her long history of UFO sightings and encounters. So I went ahead, as I usually do with calls and reports, I contacted Fams of Monsters 14 Research and Singer 14 Society investigator Tobias Whalen, asking him to look into the claims. You can find his report on singular14.com, or you can go to Fams Monsters site and at the post titled Experiencer Describes Personal UFO Incidents in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a pretty good read, so I recommend it highly. Now, I want to thank those folks who attended our live Beyond Explanation YouTube chat this past Wednesday evening. The chat was a success, and so we are planning to continue this on a bi-monthly basis. So just check in with the times, and they'll be done on Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So we're going to try to do it, like I said, on bi-monthly or every 2 weeks. I also want to thank the readers and listeners who have contributed donations. It's very much appreciated. We continue to add more features to the blog and add Beyond Explanation. Also, Fams of Monsters 14 Research now has a dedicated website for case logs and other team and affiliate information. You can find the site at cryptidhunters.org. Again, that's cryptidhunters.org. So tonight, I welcome Granite Skies, a disconcerted journey through the unknown authors Nomar Slevik and Mike Stevens to Arcane Radio. Now, Nomar is an independent creator, researcher, and investigator in numerous aspects of the paranormal. He delights in sharing stories through different mediums such as books, documentaries, and podcasts. He has shared his works with hundreds of thousands of enthusiasts and has maintained a steady output of material for the past 20 years. Nomar's website can be found at nomarslevik.bigcartel.com. Mike Stevens is a New Hampshire native, born and bred. When not helping others with their experiences, you can find him in the forest and the mountains of the state, camping and hiking. Mike hopes to combine his simple New England values with his own experiences to give people a positive new outlook on the UFO and abduction phenomenon. Mike's website can be found at granitesky.org. So, guys, thanks for joining me this evening.
Thanks so much for having us, Lon. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mike or Nomar, whoever wanted to talk, let's start from the beginning. Just talk about the experiences. I'd say from the baby blue syndrome to the RH negative blood and beyond.
Yeah, it's certainly a lifetime of encounters for Mike, starting with infancy. But I guess to get us to the beginnings of where Mike and I began interacting, That started a few years ago now. Mike was part of the KRI Center for Consciousness Studies. That was a place that would host many types of meetings, anywhere from psychic and empath work to UFO abduction experiencer work. And there would also be presentations and documentaries shown. And I had given some presentations there. Mike and I were speaking online back and forth with one another about me doing some presentations. So once I was finally down there and meeting Mike in person, I had heard some rumblings that he had some of his own experiences. But the thing about Mike is that he doesn't make everything about him. You know, you go to the center for a certain reason, whether it's a presentation or an empath meeting or something. You know, Mike's in the background. He helps out with setup. He helps out with everything. But he's not trying to be in your face and tell everyone his story. I just heard some rumblings. He showed me a really interesting picture one time when I was there of this light beam that was coming down from the sky that was near this cabin in New Hampshire. And that was obviously intriguing. And, so through us interacting and talking more and becoming, a little bit more than acquaintances, I was starting to hear more and more parts of his story that he would, share with me. And we talked on the phone. God, I want to say it was probably 2 years ago now. Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about 2 years ago now. We had this really long conversation about a lot of different things, but a lot of it included his experiences. And I was just jaw dropped at the amount of experiences that he's had. And he was also very articulate and detail oriented in his explanations. And me being like a content creator and really finding stories like this fascinating that I want to share with as many people as possible, we started floating around the idea of maybe me writing something about his experiences. And but at that point, I was right in the throes of like 3 different projects. I always have a ton of stuff going on, and I wasn't going to be able to dedicate any time to it for quite a while. And Mike and I finally met formally for a sit-down long-form interview in late 2018 or early 2019, and had this long-form interview. I got basically the bulk of his story, and then there was months of trading messages and phone calls with me asking certain questions to follow up, get some more additional information. At the same time, I currently have a project that's live that I'm trying to promote and hit the ground running with, so I still couldn't dedicate a ton of creative time to it. It was just more of a data collection at that point. And then we sat down for another long form discussion. And this one might have been 4 hours, and it was on his turf. It was at his office. And that meeting, even though I got a lot of the same information about the stories, what was different this time was the emotion behind it, the trauma behind it that wasn't as apparent as before. And I became as equally jaw-dropped by what this man has had to live with throughout his entire life. And from that point on, it spun the book out into this wild direction neither of us had any idea that it was going to go. And maybe Mike can add some pieces here.
No, you're doing great. Keep going. No. So like you said, we kind of met just through professional terms, and it was like I liked what he was doing with some of his other projects. Seemed cool, and then when he approached me and said, hey, do you want to do this? Like, yeah, we can figure out something. We didn't even know at that point if it was going to be a book or a documentary or this. Well, I didn't know. He was pretty much done. Like, no, I just did a documentary. I'm not doing another one right now. And we just kind of fell into it. And but I guess what the listeners probably want to know is, why do you decide to do a book about me? And like you kind of briefly mentioned real quick, and Nomar kind of, this has been happening to me as early as I can remember, about three and a half. But there's indications, of since infancy up until maybe it's about a month now, but maybe it was only like 3 weeks ago, the most recent thing that's happened. I mean, when I say a lifetime, I mean a lifetime. It has really been my whole life of just this mix of almost, I don't want to say anything you can imagine, but it's been a pretty good cross section of what you would think is UFO related and some stuff that leaves you shaking your head going, I don't even know what to do with that.
Mm. Before we get into the actual encounters, let me ask you this, Mike. Do you believe that you were singled out for a reason? Let's say maybe it's a generational thing. People in your previous family had experiences as well. Do you have any idea as to why you were chosen to experience this?
Why so much? No, I don't really have an answer. As far as it following a bloodline, yes, that seems to be fairly apparent in my family. Everybody's either, at least a lot of my earlier experiences started with other family members, cousins, and this and that. Almost everybody in my family has at least seen a UFO. My great uncle was kicked out of a private school in the 60s for claiming he was abducted by aliens, and the school said, well, it's a mental issue or drugs. Either way, we're not equipped to handle it. So what that reason is, I don't know. But yeah, it definitely seems like it's through our bloodline. It seems to be on my mother's side. And yeah, I couldn't tell you the reason, but I don't think it was by accident at all.
It does seem to work like that. I have talked to many experiencers over the years, and I believe that maybe up to 90% or so have had their family experience similar stuff. I mean, just like David Eckhart, who's somebody I've worked with for over a decade, his mother and his sister have also had encounters. It's something that it does seem to work that way. So yeah, that would not surprise me at all. Now you talk about this Rh negative blood phenomena, which I have found that most of the people that I have talked to who go through repeated experiences also have Rh negative blood. So, I mean, Nomar, do you have any ideas on that?
I guess I wouldn't say I have any ideas about it, like, a theory about it. But what I do know is that it's a common thread, much like, the bloodline and other family members also having experiences. It just seems to be a common trait among abductees. And again, I don't know why. There are some organizations like Gaia and things like that that have expressed that it is some type of blood trait that might be extraterrestrial or maybe hybrid in nature or something like that. I can't speak to that, but what I can speak to is that when Mike was a baby in his infancy, there was this moment in time where his skin turned completely blue. And what we like to do, or what I like to do in the book, is to present kind of two different sides of what might be going on with Mike. And it's up to the reader to decide on what's going on. So when Mike was an infant, his parents found one day that he had turned blue, but he was breathing fine, he was eating fine, but his skin color was odd. So they obviously, like parents do, they brought him to a doctor. Doctor, was fairly dismissive and said he was probably dehydrated, things like that. They didn't think that was right, so they got a second opinion, and it was kind of more of the same talk. And then sure enough, a few hours later, Mike's skin came back to a normal skin color and everything was fine. So maybe maybe they were overreacting. So in some of the research that I did, I found that there are some reasons in nature for a baby's skin to turn blue. And it's actually a medically diagnosed issue that can happen to some infants, and it's called blue baby syndrome. And essentially, it has to do with nitrites getting into the baby's bloodstream and hemoglobin, and that can happen through formula that is mixed with water. And that type of water, again, according to the research anyways, is not really found everywhere. Like towns and cities do quite a bit in their water supply for quality assurance to try to make sure things like these negative nitrites are not in the drinking water. Of course, there is an acceptable amount that they will allow through or that they just cannot filter out. But that happens more in very rural areas, especially a lot of places that use well water.
Right.
Where Mike was born in New Hampshire, while it is somewhat rural, it's not as rural as, living out in the woods. And his family at that time had town water. They did not have well water. So it doesn't necessarily make sense that the nitrates would cause Mike's skin to turn blue, but it is a possibility. On the flip side, I did some research for if there's been reports of alien species that do have blue colored skin or blue tinged skin or something to that effect. And of course, there's hundreds of reports. You could do a quick Google search right now to anybody listening, and just type in blue skinned alien, and you'll find hundreds of stories of people who have experienced that. And I include some of those anecdotes. And I say anecdotes because nobody has any proof pretty much for a lot of this stuff, especially with a blue alien type of thing. But in some of the research that I did do, I did find that a more common trait of someone seeing a blue alien, they were in the form of a child. Now there are some adult ones that are reported as well, but I was surprised to find that there was a lot of children, and then that's just how it's presented in the book. Could it have been nitrates, or could it have been, is Mike some sort of weird hybrid? We don't know. And which one is easier to believe? In my opinion, the nitrites are easier to believe. But that's not what this book is about, and that's not what Mike has made his life about. It's not about what's easier to believe or what we can prove. It's about the witness, which is Mike. And it's about what he's gone through. So it's not about proof, it's about people. And Mike has based his whole Granite Sky organization foundation on that principle.
So why don't we start from the beginning with the actual encounters themselves? Tell us what happened and how it progressed over the years.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I remember regarding any of this was I was about 3.5 years old. We were at my grandmother's house in Southampton, New Hampshire. There was some type of family function going on because everybody was there, the aunts, uncles, cousins, and all this stuff. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, you'd go in through the front door, which brought you into the kitchen. And then from the kitchen, you kind of had to go through the dining room, which kind of was like a pass through, which opened up. From there, you'd go to the living room, to a hall, the bathroom, and the bedrooms, and all this stuff. And off that dining room, there was a 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard. And when I cut through the dining room, past this 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard, I got this immense calling to get outside. I don't remember how I got outside, but I found myself standing in the driveway. And I also found my cousin standing out there as well. So this is kind of a miracle in itself, like that one of us got through all these adults without being stopped. Never mind that both of us made it out into the yard undetected. So we're just kind of standing there. We don't know why. And the next thing you know, the woods behind my grandmother's house start glowing, almost like there's a forest fire or something. There's just this like red amberish glow, behind. All you see is like shadows of trees. And eventually this classic saucer-shaped object emerges above the tree line and starts floating across the lawn towards us. And it parks itself just to the left of this big tree that used to be there at the end of my grandmother's driveway. And, when I say classic saucer shape, it's kind of domed at the top, kind of domed at the bottom, in the wide middle. And it was probably, my best estimate, about 40 feet wide and half that in height. And it just kind of sat there. And we were staring at it, watching it, and it had this row of lights around the middle that it didn't look like individual bulbs. It was more like a fluid type thing, but it, it was soft white lights, and they changed color a little bit, but it wasn't dramatic or anything. And all of a sudden that light band changed in intensity and colors. It went to a lot more reds and oranges and was flashing a lot more quicker. And when that happened, almost like when you open your car door at night, like some type of soft interior light, like this yellowish light appeared above that center row, which kind of gave the outline of a row of windows above that center bar. And when that came on, you couldn't make out any features, but you could see like humanoid shadows or silhouettes of just like shoulders and heads. And at this point, there was just a really, really intense feeling of like when somebody's watching you, but it is more so than that. It was kind of more primal. It's kind of like if a bear or something's got you cornered, like this is a bad situation, even though you don't know what the situation is yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then in my standing memory, there was a blank. The next thing I know, this object is at the other end of the driveway by the road, hovering above a telephone pole. It kind of sits there for a minute, and then it shoots off into the sky and kind of just disappears into a dot in like the blink of an eye. And that was my standing memory, the first time anything like this had ever happened.
Did now your cousin was with you, you said?
Yeah. And she's only 6 months older than I am, so we're both like really young. There's no way they would have let us both out of the house.
Did anybody else in your family see anything or sense anything?
That night, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It's kind of one of those things. I grew up in this household where they had all, like my mother and my aunts and all them, they'd always grown up in haunted houses. Ghosts were free range. You could talk about ghosts all day long. Nobody talked about UFOs.
Right.
Even as me and my cousin grew up, we'd be like, oh, remember the UFO we saw? Yep. And then that was it. It was a surface conversation. And the rest of the family was kind of like that as well. It's like, yeah, they saw a UFO. End of discussion. Nobody really talked about it. It was like my mid-20s. I went back for a regression for that incident to try to kind of fill in the middle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get all the details. There was still a lot of fear involved, but that's when it became a little more clear that the visit was intentional. It wasn't an accident. We weren't at the wrong place at the wrong time or anything like that. And there was a familiarity that this wasn't the first time as well, which was a little odd. But so after I did that regression, I was just starting to kind of come to terms with this myself, not just this, but everything that had happened up to this point around, 25, and starting to get to the point where I had to admit it to myself that this was real. And so this was fresh on my mind. So I called my cousin to see what she remembered. And I said, you remember the UFO, we saw when we were kids? I'm like, I need you to tell me what you remember, and then I'll tell you what I remember. And she started telling me, and the minute she started telling me, I remembered, but it was a totally different incident. And again, it was at my grandmother's house.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother has this big wraparound porch, and it was basically storage, and it was like a treasure trove for us kids to go out and play on. And we were out there doing whatever one night, and the neighbor, not across the street, but on the same side of the street, overlooking their backyard, this red light came into the sky and started doing, I call it dancing because I don't know what else to call it, like circles, figure eights. There's no way it was a modern, any type of aircraft that we know of now, and drones weren't a thing back then. And that's what she remembered. And I remembered it when she started telling me, and I was like, my memory tells me we're older than that, the 3-year-old version. So then I told her what I remembered, and she didn't have recall of that.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's interesting. I know that a lot of times when people have these experiences, in most part, they won't recall something until much, much later. They won't even realize they had lost time or what happened at whatever location they went to. Was that your case? I mean, did the regression actually help you, or did you start remembering more as time went on?
A little of both. Like, I remembered everything except that middle gap before the regression, ever since it happened. It did fill in some gaps. And once I got to that point where I was consciously not trying to forget this stuff, I guess is a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more stuff did start flooding in. And the more I was open to it, the more something weird would hit you. Like, I started out like very much, aliens are bad, this and that. Like, all these people who were talking, about good aliens and this and that, they can, throw it right out the window. Like, no, that's not my experience. And the more I just started really being open to the whole thing, I kind of started realizing I'm only looking at it through my perception, and there's probably a lot of this I don't understand, which is still true, but there's probably a great bigger picture that I'm taking in.
So as far as the beings that you encountered, can you give us some descriptions of what they looked like, how they acted, how they treated you, etc.?
Yeah. So for the most part, I've dealt with a lot of, I guess I'd say, archetype grays. And what I mean by that is, the elongated big head, the big eyes, but they've come in a lot of demeanors. I've seen some what you'd call regular grays. Some have been a darker brown and a little bit taller. I had an experience. We ended up actually moving into the house next to my grandmother's, and when I was living there, I had encounters for almost like a schooling type situation for what best we can estimate about 9 months with. Again, they looked like that gray archetype, but they were almost more porcelain white, softer features, a little bit rounder. On one occasion, some of the like 5-foot tallish, darker browner grays type, whatever you want to call them, things were walking me up a driveway, and I heard like this. If they talk to you, you can understand, but you don't hear them talk to each other. And this occasion, as they were escorting me up the driveway, I heard one of them say to the other, "Don't let them turn around." And when you hear that, your first instinct is to turn around. And when I did, there was almost, I call it the like creature of the Black Lagoon. It's pretty similar to that, except it had more cat-like eyes, like creeping behind a tree. I've had some like troll type looking things, short, 3 foot. Again, the big black almond shaped eyes. That's been the bigger part, is that type of creature. or being, for lack of a better word.
Right.
More holographic versions of them that were bluer on a couple occasions, but that's been the main type for my experiences.
Did now when they communicated, when you heard them communicate among themselves, or if they communicated with you, what was it done telepathically, voice, and did they speak in English, or was it something that at the time you just understood?
That's a really good question. It was always telepathically. Whether it's English or not, or I just understood, is a really great question. To me, it sounded like English, but yeah, I never really thought about it beyond that.
Yeah, that's something that I've dealt with other experiences. Well, I've been abducted myself, so it seemed that they communicated with me telepathically, but I did understand what they were talking about. And most others who I've talked to said the same thing. Now, there have been instances where some of these beings, and I'm talking maybe higher order beings, would actually speak voice-wise in English, from what I have been told. So I was just curious as to what, how you understood them.
Oh yeah, audibly, I don't think I've ever understood it. I've never heard them speak to me audibly like we would speak to each other. Yeah.
So, Nomar, when you started hearing this story from Mike, what were your thoughts? Did it sound like anything close to what you had heard previously?
Definitely, but only in parts. Some of those common themes, like I was abducted, but I don't really remember a lot of it. Things like that you commonly hear from abductees. But what really got me about Mike's story were all the things that I had never heard before. He's got stories where, as a child, for some reason, he decided to get up and look out a window, and there's like these 5 short troll-looking creatures there, and they're all holding spade shovels, and they've dug this perfectly round circle in the ground. And as Mike is telling me this, he's also trying to articulate it to himself, like that actually might have been a screen memory. Like it seems like maybe more had been happening, but this is as much as they were going to let me see, or this is the version of it that I'm allowed to see. And that actually became kind of a running theme within Mike's narrative, like him being aware enough that he was probably remembering some screen memories, which were still odd in and of themselves. He has some other screen memories of seeing white albino deer, like 2 of them. Seeing one is rare, especially in our area, but seeing 2 next to each other is obviously odd. There's been other weird animal things that have happened, and that can be some common threads with some abductees. When you get into Mike's details, they're certainly strange. He had this one experience where there was this holographic image of a gray alien's face in his bedroom window, which was on the 2nd floor. The face took up the entire window. And again, it kind of looked like a hologram. And then all of a sudden, a blue jay out of nowhere smacked into the window. And hearing that, I immediately thought, well, what is the significance of a blue jay? And so in doing some research about, blue jays in particular, people who see them a lot or maybe find themselves like a kindred spirit with a blue jay has a lot to do with things that are kind and not negative. And I think some of that might have been feeding Mike's subconscious for when he got older, like maybe these haven't all been negative experiences. Maybe there is a reason to all this. No idea what the reason is, but maybe it's not as malevolent as he had thought.
Yeah. I did see in the book where you had talked to Mike Clellan, and I have talked to Mike on several occasions because for about a year, I had been experiencing a lot of references and sightings of owls. for that 1 year period, and that was the same year period in which my wife was sick, and she also passed away. But I had also been having encounters with these tall white beings, and I had the one abduction. But the interesting part was there was always this reference to owls. I would see owls, I would hear about owls, then I would actually see them. And in fact, my associate Butch Wachowski, he and I had talked about it because I was telling him about it, and we had no idea why this was going on. Then, of course, when I talked to Mike, his story is pretty well known about the reference to the owls and possible alien references. And it seems you had something very similar to that.
Yeah, it almost worked in the opposite way, though. Like, because Nomar looked it up and it was supposed to be about, like, hey, this isn't all bad. And it was like, I developed a phobia. I'm not a small guy. I am 6 foot, I have, even now, I am terrified of songbirds. Like, I can watch them through a window. If they get too close to me, I will flip out. People think it's funny when they see, like, me have a heart attack over a chickadee landing next to my foot. But I'm fine with owls, raptors, eagle, like things that really could tear my face off. I'm okay with. Mm-hmm. But I've had a lot of encounters. I think maybe because of that phobia with deer. But I'm in the woods a lot, so sometimes it's hard to tell. Like sometimes an owl is just an owl, sometimes it's not. But I have one stretch of road I used to travel where it was where I saw the 2 white deer. Within like a quarter mile of everything, a giant white owl, which, yeah, they exist, but shouldn't exist in our part of the world, swooped down in front of the car where I had to. And it was the same area where I saw, I don't even want to call it a craft. It looked craft shaped, but it was more of like a plasma, just glowing white light in the sky. And this all happened, within a quarter mile of each other on the same stretch of road.
Yeah, it does seem that these owls are like a precursor to an actual event. Now, are they controlled by these alien beings, or what's the thing? Maybe that's the same thing with the deer with you. They were some type of precursor to warn you or to get you ready for what was coming.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like a pre-screen memory or something to be like, okay, in your lucid state, you'll experience this, and then once you're, after what happens, and then once you become lucid again, you'll still remember the animal, the thing that you can wrap your mind around. It's interesting to theorize.
Yeah. I know in my case, it was, I had been seeing these owls, but it was more that I was getting references to owls, and which was interesting. It was in November, and my wife had just passed away, and my son and I were coming home from the hospital. It was at night, and I heard this hoot, or the owl sound, coming from outside my apartment. I never seen an owl there before, but this owl was sitting in the tree right in front of my apartment. And it was there for about an hour, then it was gone, and I hadn't had an owl reference or seen an owl since then. So my theory is that during the time that she was sick, that they were possibly trying to tell me that they were observing me, observing her, or whatever, and that these owls were some type of, I don't know, sentries or something that were just keeping an eye on me. But that's the only that's the only thing that I can come up with. That now, the fact that I've talked to Mike, and now what you're telling me, it does seem that these are some type of warning or precursors to be ready for something to occur.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is my problem with ufology, that they're so focused on the, nuts and bolts aspect of it.
Yeah.
When you start talking to people who've actually had the experiences, it dwells into other stuff. Like if you didn't know somebody had a UFO experience, you'd be like, oh, that's paranormal, that's a spirit guide, that's this, that's that. It's all the same stuff. We're just looking at it at different angles. But this whole, I don't know what the right term is, spiritual side of it, I guess, of ufology is there. It just nobody wants to look at it. This stuff happens regularly, or there's other cases, not particularly in mine, but where people have followed what they thought was a recently deceased loved one out into the woods and then had an abduction. I'm not saying they're the exact same as ghost spirits or whatever term you want to call them, but they can definitely operate around those same lines. I think they're around us all the time, whether we see a light in the sky or not.
Yeah, I believe that as well. And in fact, I do believe a lot of the phenomena that people experience, be it ghost or, any other type of strange, unexplained encounter, I think there very well may be a connection between these different genres of the paranormal. And I think in this instance, that may very well be. And in fact, now you were talking about the reporting agencies or the groups like MUFON and stuff. They really do not recognize that. I have talked to experiencers where they have contacted MUFON or NUFORC or some other group, and they're just basically ignored. And
or worse, laughed at. Yeah,
are laughed at, and that has happened so many times. It's almost like a running joke now, basically with these UFO organizations, because they just really don't seem to be cognizant of what's actually going on. All they're worried about is the light phenomena or some kind of craft or something, like you said, nuts and bolts.
Right, which I don't get at all. Like, if you want to be a nuts and bolts researcher, be one. But the problem is, unless you see it yourself, you have to rely on the experiences of the eyewitnesses.
Mm-hmm.
But then you make fun of the eyewitnesses or the, witnesses if they don't tell you exactly what you want to say, if it's not the cookie cutter story. So eventually, it's the same rhetoric round and round and round until one of those researchers actually sees something for themselves, and then they no longer are a researcher, they're an experiencer.
That's right. It's just like skeptics of any type of phenomena.
Sure.
They're talking a good game until it happens to them. Then they're true believers. And, I've seen it happen many times.
Yeah, often. And I'd like to add on to that a little bit, like whether you're a nuts and bolts researcher or investigator, or you're on the more spiritual or philosophical side, or anywhere in between, if you handle the witness as you would somebody in your family, a friend, meaning you're just handling the witness with kindness, regardless of what they're telling you. And again, it doesn't matter what your angle is, nuts and bolts or philosophical. If you handle them with kindness and an open, non-judgmental mind, doesn't mean you believe them 100%, but if you're just open-minded enough to listen to them and show them kindness, that's okay. If you're a nuts and bolts researcher, as long as you handle the witness as delicately as possible. A lot of these witnesses are experiencing PTSD from these encounters, and when we laugh at them or don't treat the weirder parts of their experiences with the same amount of kindness as the nuts and bolts aspect, I think that's where you lose a lot of people. And I also think that's where your research and investigation lacks, and you won't get all the proper information that you need. It's not hard to be kind to somebody, but for some people, I guess it is, and I just don't relate to that in any way.
I agree with you. I mean, I take any report I get and give the witness the benefit of the doubt, because look, their experience is being shared with you. Now you become part of their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's up to you to, actually help them to understand what may be going on instead of ridiculing the experience itself. And you talk about PTSD. Absolutely, there is a cause and effect with any of these type of experiences.
Absolutely. And it's just like any life experience. You get in a really horrible car accident through no fault of your own, or even if it was your fault, there is going to be a traumatic effect on your brain. The same thing is happening with all these encounters. And somebody that was in a car accident, you wouldn't start ridiculing them, if they said, well, and they started getting philosophical about their car accident experience. I was really scared. I felt so alone until the police arrived, until there were more people on scene, something like that. Instead of a nuts and bolts person may ask some more difficult questions and not have as much kindness, It's too bad
well,
that's
I have found that to be the main sticking point with all these UFO groups is that they're they have their protocol, and that protocol is very stiff, very very, I don't know, organizational, let's put it that way.
Sure.
And they don't like new ideas coming in.
No, and it's been that way for the longest time. What were you supposed to do as an experiencer? You reported somebody, and a lot of this was based off the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Absolutely.
They said, well, if you don't meet these markers, your case can't be real. But if your case did meet those markers, well, you're copying. So it's still not real. Like, it was a double-edged sword. You couldn't win for trying. And, most of these people didn't want their names out there. They weren't looking for fame. They weren't looking for any of this. They just wanted to be heard. And that's where ufologies failed.
Right. I was young when Benny and Barney Hill had their encounter, or when, let's put it this way, when it started coming out into the mainstream. And that didn't happen until several years afterwards.
Right.
But of course, they went through a lot, and not only the fact that they were a mixed race couple, they also had to put up with a lot of other doubters, and they suffered a lifetime of that. I mean, I've talked to Kathleen about it, and Kathleen Martin,
right.
And of course, she wrote the book, and she was Betty's niece. And they did suffer through a lot of criticism, but their case was known now, but it still goes on. People that have these experiences still suffer from the criticism, and I just believe if it wasn't for independent researchers and investigators away from the large UFO community, that this is the only way that these stories are getting out.
And I think I'd also like to put in there that I do believe nuts and bolts has its place, because there is an understanding that I would love to have about what these vehicles are. Are they spaceships? Are they extraterrestrial, or are they not? It does have its place, but in regards to these UFO organizations, like the debacle of MUFON and what it's become, especially since Jan's whole BS, which is disgusting. I think the only way that they should come back, in my opinion, and who cares what my opinion is, but the only way they should come back is to just be a database, and get away from these dumb conferences and all this stuff, and just be a database. And I think that's part of what Davenport is maybe doing right, is to just collect these cases. I don't think there should be a dismissing of the stranger ones, but just to be a collection point is a good place, or is a good thing for those organizations to be. And then investigations or research can happen from the people that have a passion for it. I don't know
and your Davenport's not perfect, but it's definitely better than MUFON. But that's all it should be. If you're going to send field investigators out, let them come out, but you're not judge and jury. You weren't there. You don't get to decide what this person went through. Especially when you approach them with that attitude, you're not going to get the whole truth. Not in one shot, not in two shots. I know for myself, even just talking to Nomar, who I trust in my life, he doesn't know everything about my story. even though we wrote this book, there's stuff I left out that is so personal to me that I won't share with anybody, not even him at this point. Maybe someday, but not yet.
Yeah.
And that, and
I
so when you
understand that.
go in,
I understand that completely.
And when you go in with this, I'm the authority on UFOs, tell me everything you know, you're not going to get anything out of this person. They're going to shut down and tell you the bare minimum.
Yeah. Well, we this winged humanoid phenomenon that's been going on in and around Chicago, around Lake Michigan for the past 4 years or so. MUFON did get the original sighting reports.
Yeah.
And they basically ignored it until we started getting into it and started investigating. Then we start getting pushback. But those cases that they did look at, and some of the more recent cases around the airport itself, they flustered the witnesses so bad that they literally cut off with them and contacted us.
That's too bad.
Yeah. But that has.
Yeah, I've talked to so many people. Their first question is, "Are you affiliated with MUFON?" And I say no, and they're like, "Good, I can talk to you." Yeah.
Right. Well, I tell you, this. You did mention the KRI Research Center for Consciousness. Now, I do believe that they no longer exist. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are now defunct. We hope to get restarted again. It became a rent issue, and we lost the building, and we kind of all went our separate ways. We're all still doing our little meetings here and there, and then COVID hit, and it's been a disaster. But
well, you now with graniteskies.org, you and I looked at the website. You do try to help experiencers. It's something very similar to what I do. What's your process? How do you do this?
It really depends on the individual, because I don't think this is a topic you can have like a standard format on.
Right.
It depends on where the person comes in and where they are with the experiences. Like somebody could be like me and have a lifetime of experience and be like, yeah, I'm kind of okay with it. I just want to talk about it. And some people could just see a UFO like close up, no, it's not a light in the sky, like an actual craft, and have their whole worldview shooken, like, holy crap, this stuff is real, it's not supposed to be real, and still have the almost same level of trauma. So you have to take everybody individually and see where they are. And I mean, my basic game plan is I kind of try to get a feel for them, let them see what they're willing to say up front, and then I'll share what a little bit mine to make them comfortable, and then they'll share a little bit back, and then I'll share, it's like I don't have clients. I make friends is all I do. And,
right.
It's how any friendship works. You don't know where the trust line is. So you just keep being there for them. And then it's amazing because they're coming to me for help, but they're helping me. It's so circular that, because it's amazing just to see the stuff that people say and just what's out there and how big this really is. And like some of the weirder parts of my story that are in the book that I told Nomar, I was like, yeah, this is kind of weird, but it's just filler. It probably doesn't, mean anything. And that's some of the stuff I've gotten the most feedback from people who've already read the book going, oh yeah, it's something similar. And I was like, if I had wrote the book myself, I would have left that out. I wouldn't even put that in there because it was too weird. It didn't fit. Mm-hmm. And that was a great thing about Nomar. One, not only that he's just so understanding and kind, but he's not only the author in this, he writes the story in such a way that, my story, keeps the pages turning, and not in an egotistical way. He inserts himself as a character too, because he steps back like in the process as we're doing this interview and kind of puts in his reflections of what he's thinking. And, he becomes his own little character in the book, and mm-hmm. which I think is great. And I don't mean to throw him out under the bus, and I don't think I am, because he said in other interviews, he doesn't call himself an experience. He's seeing quite a bit of weird stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a trust factor there. I can understand that.
Absolutely.
You really have to get close with people who have had these experiences as opposed to somebody who saw a Bigfoot or saw something else. It requires more
like tell me
trust,
what
more understanding. Yeah.
like what did you feel? What happened the day after? How were you feeling, the week after? And like all of that, in my opinion, is part of the process of an encounter. Like Mike was saying, I don't really consider myself an experiencer just because I've kind of put Mike at the he's that part. Like you have to experience what he has to be an experiencer. I mean, not really, but that's how I consider myself. Like I haven't had the experiences Mike had, so I'm not an experiencer. I've just seen some stuff, like millions of people have. But I did have my own creature sighting, and it was the first one I ever had, except I had one like 10 years prior, but it was like in a dreamlike state, so I have no idea if it was real. But this one I was driving, and it was 100% real. And it's always interesting to me when a researcher of this phenomena has their own experiences.
Mhm.
And what do you do with that? What do I do with it? So what I did was I actually took my experience and I gave it to another researcher so it could be marked down as historical record. I have talked about it publicly just a couple of times, but I wanted to hand it off to somebody else because, I wanted as unbiased an opinion or whatever as possible, because obviously I have my own biases and perceptions and all that stuff. But seeing the creature and keeping the experiencer in my mind as opposed to the interviewer or the researcher, I had emotions along with that. There was fear, there was confusion, there was awe. And there were also some physical aspects. I smelled something that reminded me of sulfur when I stopped and rolled down my window at the area where I saw this creature. It had since left, but I wanted to experience the environment and ended up actually smelling something. And I wasn't expecting that. I was actually rolling down the window to see if I could hear it walking in the woods, and I couldn't, but the smell was there, and it actually stayed with me for a couple of miles down the road. And it got so bad I had to roll the windows down. But anyways, my parents don't live that far from where I live, so I actually drove right to my mom's house. I was like, you got to hear what just happened. And the point of me telling you that is I was in full experiencer mode in that moment. And it was honestly nice to be on that side of it, because of all these projects, I'm always on the other side.
Right.
But once I got done telling my mom and I took her to the spot and showed her where I saw it and all that stuff, I went home and I wrote down the experience, and then I contacted an investigator and gave them my story. But, to be an experiencer on one hand and to be the researcher on the other is a privilege, in my opinion. And, Mike is doing that as well. So it feels as though we're on the same page, like philosophically, not to overuse the word, but we seem to be on that same page. And that has to do with understanding not only the experience, but what somebody goes through.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
brother, I'm in the same boat because I've had encounters myself, and
Sure.
you really, I think you really do get a better insight of what people are going through. Their confusion more than anything else. That you have the ability then to answer a lot of their questions, or even to, help them or soothe them as to what they went through.
Sure.
Yeah, and so much. Oh,
well, I was just going to say, that there's a lot of in trauma for, domestic abuse or things like that. A lot of the supporters or people that help them are survivors themselves, and it's kind of a similar thing that's happening here,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so much of this book, the process of writing the book, didn't go as planned. It was because stuff happened and we trusted each other. Like we both had to make all these like really leaps of faith. Like, are we in this together or aren't we? I'm trusting him with my story, my life, in one way of putting it. And that, like, he's an author, he's a creator. This is what he does. This is, why he's a millionaire, right? No. So the publisher picked it up, and they're like, yeah, we have final control of the cover, the title, and this. And that was before they even got into editing it. And we're like, he's like, no, I'm not comfortable with this, man. He's like, I don't. And I'm like, I got you. He's like, if I walk away, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. He's like, they own, because of other previous contracts that he's written books for them, like they owned them for a little bit. He's like, it could be a while before we can do anything with this. I'm like, it's okay. We're going to do this right or we're not. And it worked out. They let him out of the contract. Other things, just everything fell into place the way we needed it to be. Like, it was an amazing process to go through. To me, it was just amazing as some of the experiences that led us to writing the book.
And there's, I'm not afraid to use this word, but it might sound weird to listeners, but there's an intimacy there that we didn't expect. And because of Mike's willingness to be so raw and real with the emotional side of it, I felt that the only thing I could do was to be just as raw and real about my own inner turmoil that is sometimes extraterrestrial related and sometimes just life related. I suffer medically diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and suicidal ideation is a thing that happens in my life. And to normalize that discussion is a really big deal in my world. Everybody has mental health issues. And if we can normalize that discussion, at least between friends, then we can normalize that discussion when we come on a show like this, or if we're given a presentation, we can talk about it because it's so important and because so many people go through it. And this book goes to some really, really dark places before it gets lighter. And that's not to keep the pages turning or to sell more books. It's because that's what's happening in our lives, and that's what's happening in a lot of people's lives. And we feel like, we hope anyways, that this book will be relatable to people that are suffering. And whether we hear back from them or not is not the point. We just hope it helps,
Yeah, at some point we made the decision not to make this a UFO book, to make this about the human experience. And it was a gamble, but we hope it's paying off.
Well, it works. I mean, you can tell that when you read it. The book is titled Granite Skies, A Concerted Journey Through the Unknown. And guys, I want to thank you for coming on the show. If you guys come up with any follow-up or have other projects, let me know about it. I will definitely try to get you back on the show.
Appreciate it, Lon.
We'd be more than appreciated, yeah.
Yeah, we'll keep you in the fold. Thanks so much for having us on.
Okay, you take care and have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
You as well.
Now, if you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms of Monsters blog site. If you're interested in supporting Phantoms of Monsters and Arcane Radio, you can use the PayPal donation buttons on the blog and newsletter. Your continued support is always appreciated. Our new YouTube channel, Beyond Explanation, has new content being added daily, including Arcane Radio archive shows, and soon we'll be putting and producing documentaries on there as well. Check it out and subscribe. I want to again thank Nomar Slevik and Mike Stevens for joining me this evening, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Stay healthy and have a safe and enjoyable weekend. Good night.